Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/324, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshifted.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 324th edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. Day 2. After a nice night at the cabin, the second day looked to be a wet one, with forecasts of dangerous winds whipping the trail. Calling an audible seemed to be the plan. The right plan at that. But would there be another more mechanical issue that might be an impediment to making the final camp of the trip? Folks, day 2 was a little bit of a shorter one, as you will discover, and you'll understand why, but it was still a fun one. One thing I wanted to mention here at the top of the show is something that I don't believe I knew during the trip, but I think is important to talk about in the context of the pod. The Park Service has opened up all of the water pumps at each of the camps. However, they have seemingly permanently chosen to no longer treat the water in those pumped wells at the campsites. What does that mean for you? Number one, if you, like me, hate the taste of iodine, you're kind of celebrating a little bit. However, if you want to safely use that water in your cooking or drinking, it is recommended that you grab one of the ubiquitous and multiple brands of pumps. I happen to use the Sawyer pump. That is my pump of choice. And bring that with you and treat all water that you take from those pumps. Now, is that good for you? Is that bad for you? I think different people are going to feel different ways about that, but that is the new reality here. I think it's great for those of us, like I said, who don't care for the iodine treatment and would prefer actually a better bit of technology that is in our pumps. So I think that's great. I have yet to do that on any trip subsequent to this trip. I did not bring my pump on this trip, but now it will be a go-to, a must every time I ride the C&O, because you got to do that now if you want to be able to consume or use that water for cooking. All right, with that little bit of a PSA out of the way, let's get to day 2. Good morning from the cabin at the beginning of day 2. And as I alluded to at the end of last week's episode, of the day 1 episode, we're going to have to call a bit of an audible today. We are getting some pretty nasty storms that are including wind. Now, as you all know, I am totally fine riding in the rain. I'm fine setting up camp in the rain, etc., etc. But this is not a trail to mess with thunderstorms and with wind, particularly since we have not had any for a couple of weeks. We really are in drought zone right now. My concern on a day like this is that a storm like that is going to take down trees. And a few years ago, somebody on a bicycle was hit by a tree and did not make it. So I am super mindful of all of that. But that does not mean that day 2 is not going to happen. It just means that it's going to be abbreviated with a fast forward to allow us to continue the adventure a little bit. This episode may not be as long because there won't be quite as much cycling involved. But what we're going to do, you can hear Gizmo in the background right now. What we're going to be doing is I'm going to wait out the storms. They should be done sometime in the afternoon. And I'm hoping that we are able to get at least a little bit of cycling in. If the rain and wind, it's really the wind that I'm more into at this point. If that ends up happening earlier than the plan would be, that I would end up in Shepherdstown and still ride from there to Harper's Ferry. Not exactly a lot of miles, but still, more than an hour worth of cycling. And there might be some video game downed trees in between me there and the campground. So yeah, we'll have to see what's going on with that. If it does not end very quickly and or it's impossible really for me because of waning light or other elements to get to Harper's Ferry, I can always go to Killiansburg Caves, which is 3 miles in the other direction. But then I'm going to have to figure out a fast forward, I think, on day 3. But we'll just deal with that when we get to it. So a little bit of a different day 2. In fact, it's going to be bunch of hours between when you hear me talking right now and in real time when I am adventuring on the bicycle. But that is how it is. And it goes back to the lesson takeaway from the California adventure that we talked about a few weeks ago. You know, you want to push through, you want to do things. I'm certainly going to be doing that. I'm still going to be riding, I think, a little bit in the rain. I might be setting up camp in the rain. But I am not going to adventure in the stupidity zone when there is heavy wind, thunderstorms, lightning. Just not going to do that. It's just not safe. And I think that's the right call for today. So is day 2 a little less fun on the pod? Maybe, but much safer and much better. Also, I get to hang out at the cabin for a few hours, and that sounds pretty good right now as I sit here with my coffee in hand, talking to you on my deck. All right, a few hours later, the front has moved through, the sun is out, so we will be resuming this ride. Just judging by my driveway and the amount of rain that came down, the trail conditions are probably going to be a little less than ideal for, I think, the rest of this ride. However, the good news is that the fact that I'm going to be fast forwarding the middle part of this trail gets me to actually the brand new surface sections to the south/east of Shepherdstown. So the likelihood of the trail conditions being at least a little decent despite the rain are higher than other parts of the trail. Again, just judging based on my driveway, which is actually not all that different than the surface of the C&amp parts. So in any event, we'll be getting out there in the next couple of hours. I'll be fully fed. Bike has been updated. It's fully lubricated. And yes, I actually did something with my chain, believe it or not. And it seems to be going okay. It's all set up in the Jeep, and we're going to be going in a little bit. I got to pick up the dog here because he has fallen. There he goes. And yeah, we'll be back on the ground soon. The new challenges that come now that we're on the other side of this front, of course, trail conditions, number one. And trail conditions doesn't just include the riding capability of the trail, but we also have some new challenges with the possibility that if the winds were worse than they were here, which that was what the forecast was, there's always a possibility of some newly downed trees. And depending on what the nature of them are, you got to get around them somehow. And sometimes that's easier said than done. So that's going to be on the table. And that's not just for today, but also for tomorrow, the final day, next week for you. So that's something to be thinking about. The other thing that's going to be an interesting thing is that depending on when I get rolling, and that's going to be an open question, I may be doing some of this part of the trail at twilight or even perhaps after dark and having to set up in the dark. Don't think that that's going to be too bad. Again, trail conditions may be dicey, but we'll just have to deal with that. As you know, from last week's episode for you, yesterday for me, I've got yesterday? Or was it the day before? My goodness, I always, bike touring brain is something else, isn't it? I do have lights there. I'll fully charge. We'll make sure that we get good illumination of the trail so I do this safely, but I will be doing this at a less than breakneck pace just to keep things a little bit safer. So interesting, this trip has done something that is different than most. It'll be much more night riding potentially on the C&O than I've ever done before, which is fine. Of course, I've heard of some instances where there have been folks who have through-ridden the C&O, like straight from Cumberland all the way to DC, and of course that involves some night riding. So it can be done, for sure. Not my preference, but hey, I'll take what I can. So this is not, you know how I said at the beginning of all of this that my intention was to do a complete through ride. That's clearly not going to happen. But my favorite thing about this, as I was telling Kimberly earlier, normally when I have to make deviations on the trail, you can hear Gizmo in the background. Normally when I make deviations, it means the end of a tour. But this time, no, it just means that we're modifying the middle of it, doing a little fast forward, and then ending up at one of my favorite campsites on the entire trail. So next you'll hear, we'll be back on the trail. From the opposite side of the river, from Shepherdstown, West Virginia, it is the continuation of day 2. A little bit of a fast forward. The rain is largely stopped. It did come back. There still are some cells, but there was no thunder for the last couple of hours at least, which is great. And I'll be honest, you know, there was a lot of word of wind and all sorts of stuff. I'm not sure if we really ever got that. Might have been in other areas, just not around by where my cabin is, or down here in Shepherdstown, which is a solid 40-minute drive from my place. So you can imagine, if you go 7 miles straight to the river, and we have crossed the bridge that shall not be crossed by pedestrians, unless you are like me and you throw caution to the wind. And yeah, anyways, that's around mile marker 112, 114, 114, I think it is actually. And I'm at 72 now. So we did a bit of a fast forward today, but I think for good reasons, safety first, all that other kind of thing. Substantially cooler right now. It is very chilly out. I got to have a nice evening and morning and day with Kimberly while the rain poured down. And then we went to Shepherdstown to enjoy ourselves and have a little dinner, get some snacks, got loaded up, supplied up, which is fantastic. And I am now dropped off on the trail here on this side of the river, and they're back to the cabin for another evening together, meaning Kimberly and the dogs. And I am riding to Huckleberry Hill campsite. Only about 10 miles. So will this podcast be terribly long? Answer no. No, it will not. But I will try to give you at least a little bit of an idea of everything. It'll be interesting to see if anybody's there. The folks that I ran into on the first night, the day 0 pod, they presumably would like to be, I would think, in Harper's Ferry and perhaps be at this campsite. I don't know the answer to that. They got rained on today, that is for sure. And I don't think that they were particularly, some of them, well outfitted for rain. So we'll see. Will be interesting. There are certainly people on the trail. There are certainly people camping. I don't know if the rain would have chased people off. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So not much more to add other than I'm wearing my rain jacket, but not my rain pants. I can pull those out in a pinch if need be, but I believe it's just feeling like it's mostly done. Could there be a few more drips? Yeah, but I don't think anything that if I were rained on in this particular configuration, that it would become problematic. It's just too short of a ride. My hope is I can get the tent up in the dry, and if there's any additional rain, it doesn't happen until after that. But yeah, I got plenty of warm clothes. I've got new socks, new layers. I even grabbed an additional pair of water shoes. They're kind of like surfer shoes. They're mesh, and they've got, a shoe bottom, a shoe sole. And I've used those before as camp shoes in the past tours. I can cycle in them if need be. So if for some reason things do get amiss, awry, things go amiss, English, bike touring brain, cannot do it, then I do have a dry pair of socks and a dry pair of shoes for tomorrow. So I feel like I'm in great shape right now. And we're just passing mile marker 72. So that's roughly 10 miles from Huckleberry Hill. All right, adventure, more of it to come. So just past Antietam Creek Campground, I'll say mile marker 70-ish or so. Rain's coming down, and I'm in that middle ground where I'm like, do I pull out the rain pants or not? I think it's starting to come down enough that I think I will. Also, of course, we know what happens when the phone gets wet. Capacitive screen does not work very well. I do have a Ziploc bag buried someplace in here, but I just don't think it's going to be that much exposure to it, so I don't think I'm going to stress about that, although it might impact my ability to take pictures like I just did or record entries. So, yeah, we'll figure it all out. So far, so good. It could have been like this all day, so to just deal with it for an hour or so is really not a big deal. But beautiful out. And, as stormy as it was today, there were a fair number of people at the campground, including I saw one bike. So I don't know what their story is, but they clearly were done for the day, staying there. A mere, 10-ish miles from one of my favorite campgrounds of all time, but, it is a little bit better set up there, and you do pay for it there. It is one of the, I did not do any of the paid campgrounds for the series I did on YouTube, where I video documented all of the not the free ones, and I did that as an active choice that I suppose I probably should have included just for the completist in me. But then I suppose I would have also wanted to put in any of the for-profit ones, the private ones, and that just gets to be a bag of herd after a while because they come and they go and blah, blah, blah. All right, well, look, it's starting to rain a little bit more, so I'm going to put on rain pants just so that I don't have soaking wet pants at the end of this. Oh, and I can give you a precise mile marker because I'm coming up on one. Mile marker 69. All right, from mile marker 69, I bid you adieu. All right, well, when it rains, it pours, as they say, but the rain is stopping. Why am I mentioning this? Well, I have had a front rack mechanical. A nut has come off, which is the biggest fail point for this entire rack. That is semi-catastrophic, except zip ties. Zip ties are going to get me into camp tonight, and I will see if I have a nut in my prodigious tool bag that will help with it. But worst case scenario, I will just be able to reinforce with zip ties tomorrow morning, I think, to make sure that this thing is good. I added 8 additional pounds of weight because I put my full gallon water bladder on this, and that might have been the reason for it. I don't know if the bolt that holds it to the vertical tube, I don't know the names of these things, the tube that goes straight up that meets your handlebars, that's where it goes into. Yeah, there was no nut there, so I don't know if it's stripped out or if the nut just loosened over time and rattled out itself. But I do believe that I'm in good enough shape to proceed. I used 2 heavy-duty zip ties. They are attached in a way that is not ideal because they are both, well, one of them, let's see, let me make sure I still have full range of movement. I can still steer, but every time I move, one of those zip ties is moving along with it. Now, I think for a long-term situation, that would be an obvious fail point, but for what my needs are, I think it'll be fine, particularly since I have 2 here. It's pretty tight. I'm feeling pretty good about it. Problem solving. It's what we do in the bicycle touring world, isn't it? And I consider myself at least semi-handy, but this is a solid hack that seems to be working just fine. I'm gonna go with this. I feel pretty good about it. Bike tours, C&O, man. I am very much in between 2 towns right now. I'm not that far. I could certainly push and get to a place, but I'm fine. I mean, I think I'll be able to ride this pretty safely to the next campsite and be able to solve this more officially tomorrow. And if it ends up being the exact same setup, it'll be that setup. The other option, of course, is to just throw everything on the back, which I may consider doing anyways. I certainly will not put the water on the front tomorrow, but I'm too lazy to take it off right now. There's just no point. Rain is starting to slow down. I'm glad I put on my rain pants, especially for this piece, but I like the fact that things are slowing down, and I think that the rain will be done after that, according to my weather app, which is great. So it'll be dry when I set up. All right, let's see how this works. We'll ride pretty gingerly for the next 6 or 7 miles, and it'll be all good. All right, let's get to camp. We're on mile marker 68. So it feels like I'm recording like every half mile, which may be true, but a lot has happened in the last few miles. I wanted to make a mention now that the rain has ebbed a little bit and I can more safely record how great the trail surface is here between Shepherdstown and Harper's Ferry, and I believe on to Brunswick the trail surface is also like this, and perhaps beyond. My recollection is that they were trying to connect this all up to basically around mile marker 35 or so, and I don't know if that ended up happening over the course of the last year or not, but hopefully it did, because let me tell you, as I mentioned, we had a fair amount of rain, a measurable amount of rain, and it came in kind of like one big dump starting in the early afternoon. And we've had some late showers since then, which you experienced along with me here. But this trail surface it rides like pavement. It is absolutely smooth, dry. I mean, it's wet, but it's dry in terms of how it behaves for riding purposes. And I'll tell you what, I think I've been on record saying that the new C&O surface is superior to the Gap the gap surface. And that's been my riding experience so far. I don't know if technology has improved. I feel like a bit of a broken record. I think I've had this whole discussion with you all before, but this is excellent riding. And so I just want to underscore that because, still on a lot of forums, the C&O gets a ton of grief for being a bad surface. And it certainly is in parts. But if this is true, we've got between roughly mile marker 35 and roughly mile marker 70, that's a sizable portion of the trail surface that is A+. And my understanding is it's just going to keep getting expanded in the parts where it makes sense to expand to. There are certain parts of the trail, of course, I've talked about in the past, I've experienced in the past, that can be prone to flooding. And I'm not sure if it makes sense to do this kind of trail surface there, if that's just a waste of time / money / whatever. But absolutely fantastic. A+, and making for a delightful ride. One thing that's less delightful, it's gnat season in this region, and at my cabin they were all over the place. I may have to do what Mysterious James and I did once back in the day and go bandito style, tie a bandana around my nose and mouth to keep them out. Hopefully we won't have to do that. From Huckleberry Hill Hiker-Biker Campsite. Very excited to be here, all set up in camp, cozy. There is nothing better after a little bit of a wet ride than getting everything set up, getting into your tent, and maybe getting out of any kind of somewhat wet clothes and getting into something dry and enjoying a little dinner, getting all ready for bed. There's nothing better than that. It's fantastic. A few folks in camp tonight. Everybody seems to be a little waterlogged after today's rain, so I feel a little bit like my fast forward bypassed a lot of that, but I had my own challenges, as you heard. But yeah, an abbreviated day 2, but a fun day 2. I'm very excited that I'm exactly where I wanted to be tonight, and that was an open question at some point earlier today. So it's great to be here, and I'm super excited to bring a full and robust day 3. Tomorrow morning is going to be a little bit of maybe I'll look-see at that rack and see if there's anything else I can do to reinforce it. I think it could work from here to DC as is, but I may see if there's any other opportunities that I have in some of the repair kit stuff that I've got. Zip ties often work just fine, and if that's it, then that'll be it. All right. Thank you for joining on an abbreviated day 2, but I hope it was at least a little bit fun for you, a little bit of extra adventure considering the abbreviated nature. But hey, that's bike touring. Statistics. Miles biked, about 10. Down to trees avoided, way fewer than I thought. It really wasn't that big of a deal. Missing bolts in my front rack, 2. Tensile strength of my front brake cable, enough, thankfully. Huckleberry Hills reached 1, flats 0. And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community. Expanding into live shows and covering new tours, if you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options if you're not into the small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadas, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joachim Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Avilas Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemas, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc,
Ari Messenger, David Grotke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullough, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Azuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponseller, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Cyrus Faravar, John Gardner, Sam Scruggs, Dwight Pintinger, Connie Bowder, and new to the society, Rob Merrifield. And thanks to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.